Hello and good afternoon, everyone who's joining. We're just going to give it 1 or 2 minutes for more people to join today, and then we'll get started. Thanks for coming. Okay, everyone, we are 2 minutes past the hour, so we can get started. And first of all, I want to thank you very much for being here today and for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. My name is Liz Mulhall, and I'm an emergency fundraising officer with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and I'm based in Geneva in Switzerland. And I'm very pleased today to be moderating this mission moment for USA for UNHCR. So today's mission moment is about the refugee journey, which is from the moment families are forced to flee to the challenging but exciting process of rebuilding and returning home. So we've titled this conversation Help, Hope and Home because those three words really reflect what UNHCR and all of you as our donors are enabling us to do for refugees around the world. So really excited to be with you today and to kick off this panel of distinguished guests. There will be time at the end for questions, so please do pop your questions in the chat. But without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. So first of all today, yeah, next slide, please. Perfect. First of all, today we'll hear from Rula Amin, who is the Senior Communications Advisor and Spokesperson for UNHCR in the Regional Bureau in the Middle East and North Africa. So Rula leads the communications across the Middle East and North Africa region, which hosts more than 16 million refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced and stateless people. So it's a region that has many complex and overlapping crises, and Rula has a wealth of experience in this region. Before joining UNHCR in 2017. She was a correspondent for Al Jazeera International in Beirut and earlier with CNN in Jerusalem. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her insights today about the challenges in the region, but also how UNHCR is helping and how donors are really supporting us in that work. We'll then hear from Chris Murphy, who is the Associate Durable Solutions Officer with UNHCR in Jordan. He's an American, and he'll be telling you about his, some of his experience. 15 years in the humanitarian sector, including 7 with UNHCR. And Chris has served in several countries across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And today he works on durable solutions, and he'll explain a bit more what that means as regards to Syrian refugees and helping facilitate their return to the country. And then last, but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Noor Akram Al-Hariri, who is a Syrian refugee and poet. She lives in Zatari refugee camp in Jordan. She's an aspiring lawyer, and she's been using her voice and her poetry to share the stories of refugees and displaced people. So she draws from her own personal experience and writes to honour mothers, children and elders whose resilience keeps hope alive in these scenarios. So really looking forward to hearing from all of these speakers. First off, I'd like to set the stage a little bit about the refugee journey, about Help, Hope and Home. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So when we look at, what is the journey of a refugee, a lot of you will be familiar with this because you're supporters of UNHCR and you're supporters of refugees. So in the first instance, there's fleeing in an emergency, of course, and these are people, refugees are people who have compelled to flee because of conflict, persecution, or war. On the bottom left, we've got a picture of Syrian refugees fleeing across the border. This is back in 2015, I believe this photo was taken. And we know that refugees obviously often flee with nothing but the clothes on their back, and they face a lot of uncertainty as to what their next steps will be. And then there's displacement, and this period of displacement could last only a few months, or it could last up to decades, and people in very uncertain and uneasy circumstances. So one of the most common, I guess, images of a refugee would be people living in camps, and certainly a lot do. However, around the world, we have a really large number of refugees that live in urban settings, like this photo below is in Cairo in Egypt, of a Syrian refugee there. And then, after a period of displacement, what we hope for all refugees is a long-term solution. So that could take a few different forms. One of them might be resettlement to a third country. So down below, you see some Syrian refugees were actually resettled in Canada. And they were resettled by a community in the north, as you can tell by the very snowy conditions. And one of the options as well that we hope that all refugees will get the chance to do is to return home. So this is the I guess, ideal journey of a refugee. However, if we go to the next slide, we'll see what the reality is for most displaced people at this point in time. Next slide, please. Yeah, so most often what we're seeing at the moment is people flee in an emergency, and then they have a very extended period of displacement. So, up to, decades of displacement, and the inability to return home. And this can be due to, a lack of peaceful solutions, lack of ability to resolve conflicts between nations, and also a lack of resettlement places. So there are actually a really large number of refugees in need of resettlement to third countries so they can receive the support that they need. However, these places are simply not made available. So, this is the hope that we move towards every day. However, while refugees are in this displacement scenario, we absolutely rely on donor support to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks and people have the support that they need during this period of displacement. And if we go finally to my last slide that I'll be presenting. Oh, excuse me, sorry, I should say that some refugees as well go through, periods of secondary displacement, even as they will flee to a neighboring country, which is themselves going through crisis. Something like 70% of refugees flee to neighboring countries. They don't make it any further. And so this means that people are sort of stuck in complicated situations. And then, sorry, to the final slide. Just quickly, and then we're going to hear in much more detail from Rula and Chris about what UNHCR does. How is UNHCR helping refugees in all three stages of this journey? And how do you help us do this with your donations? I mean, first of all, and as you would very well know, we respond in emergencies. So in an emergency, we can ensure that refugees can reach safety and not pushed back across borders into danger. And we help provide the basics for survival: shelter, water, medical care, and we advocate for their protection and their rights. And I have to say, I've supported the fundraising response for many emergencies now, and I'm consistently really impressed with how we've got a huge arm of logistical colleagues, supply, and the amount of support that we can mobilize within 72 hours to reach an enormous number of people is really impressive. And I'm always blown away by just the logistical challenge that it presents. But we have the expertise and the experience to do this. While refugees are in displacement situations, it's UNHCR's role to safeguard their rights and enable them to not just survive but thrive in these scenarios. So that is helping host countries ensure that refugees can access their rights to education and healthcare, to safe shelter, to clean water, and to work, to earn a living, to support themselves and their families, because most refugees do not want to rely on humanitarian aid. They want to have the options to support themselves and their families and to create a future where they can rebuild. And then, finally, as we mentioned, talking about long-term solutions. So we convene and work with the international community to find solutions like voluntary return to their home when it is safe to do so, or integrating into their host community and resettlement to a third country. But this last note about return is the point that Chris is going to be speaking to in a lot more detail. So when we talk about help, hope, and home, we really are talking about the full arc of a refugee journey, and we're really pleased to go with you today through how UNHCR works alongside each of these stages, and also how your support as donors really helps us from the breaking moment of an emergency through to return home. Flexible support really allows us to place funding and support where it's needed most. And it ensures that we can really be with people every step of the way through their journey, and we really appreciate that. So without further preamble from me, I'd like to go to Rula Amin, who is going to share her regional perspectives, building on her expertise across the MENA, so to talk about the particular challenges that refugees are facing in this moment, particularly as it relates to women and girls. So please, Rula, over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and hello to our audience and all those who are investing time to come and join us and learn more about what we do, and about, really, it's not about us, it's about the needs of refugees and all the displaced populations. As probably you know, in the MENA region, we have so many conflicts going on and different refugee situations and displacement. We have Yemen, we have Libya, there's problems in Libya, we have Syria, we have Sudan is next to MENA. So there are so many. The biggest crisis we had for almost 14 years was the Syria crisis. And that crisis, which lasted, it's a conflict that lasted over almost 14 years, had led to the displacement of almost 13 million people. Now, some of these people have crossed the border into neighboring countries, and some had went onward to other countries, but most of them stayed in the neighboring countries. At some point, we had around 6 million Syrian refugees in neighboring countries. The average was 5.5 million between Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Egypt. And it was a struggle because these people were being hosted by countries who are themselves struggling economically. Some of them even had their internal conflicts. Lebanon had a political crisis, a military crisis at some point, a war 2 years ago. And so it was not easy for all these host countries to host millions of Syrian refugees and they were running away from a conflict that was very severe. They were forced to flee with nothing. And although there were some hopes in the beginning that this conflict will be over soon, it prolonged and people started losing hope, but they were stuck. And the hosting communities were stuck. And in the middle, we were trying to help the refugees, but we were also helping the host countries so that they continue hosting refugees. Now, without dwelling on the past, now we have a historic opportunity, because this is, a refugee crisis, usually they dwell on, and many times they go on for decades, and people find themselves at limbo, displaced for 10 years, 20 years. Now, with the change that we saw happening in Syria in last December, so it's only been like 9 months, there is a historic opportunity to end the displacement of almost 13 million Syrians who were forced to leave their homes during the 14 years. In addition to the refugees who had left their country, there were also 7.4 million people, Syrians, displaced inside the country. And when the regime changed and people felt, and we have a new regime, many people felt hopeful that this will be the end of their suffering, that they will be able to end their displacement, they will be able to recover, and most important, that they will be able to go home. So In 9 months, we almost have 1.8 million Syrians who were internally displaced, who have gone home back to their original areas. And from neighboring countries, we have now 1 million Syrians who had risked a lot, but they have high hopes, a lot of determination, and they crossed the border back to Syria. It might sound like maybe it's a small number because the number of refugees is still high, which is more than 5.5 million, more than 4.5 million in neighboring countries, but worldwide it's more than five. But 1 million people crossing back to Syria in less than a year, in 9 months, is a huge number. And it shows how determined people are to recover and their hopes and wishes to recover in their own country, to rebuild their lives, a future for their children. But they are going back to a country that had been devastated by conflict. So infrastructure had been damaged, the schools had been destroyed, the health clinics, the hospitals, the roads, everything had been destroyed. So many of these people, when they return, they face extreme circumstances, a lot of challenges to find work because Syria is still, you know, trying to recover from the last 14 years. The economy is struggling. And 90% of the Syrians who are still inside Syria are dependent on humanitarian assistance and need it. So these people are coming back to a situation where they are having a hard time finding work, making a living. Most of them come back to their homes that had been completely destroyed or partially damaged. They go back and they struggle to find a proper school to enroll their children. They go back, and if something wrong happens, the health facilities are also struggling. So, what we do is we try to help them as much as we can to make sure at the beginning, we try to make sure that their return is voluntary. But we also want to make sure that their return is dignified, that their return is sustainable. And when we say sustainable, is that we try to help them to ensure that the conditions that they are living in when they return will not force them to leave again. We call it onward movement. So we don't want them to feel that they have to leave again. So UNHCR tries to help them in different ways. We sometimes help them with shelter. So if the house is partially destroyed, we go to them and we try to help them fix the windows, fix the walls, maybe fix part of the house so that they can at least have some privacy, that when the rain and the winter comes, they can protect their children from the storms, the wind, the rain. It's not ideal. We cannot rebuild the whole homes for them, but we try to minimize the impact of such a condition. We also do what we call small livelihood projects. And many times we target extremely vulnerable populations and, for example, houses that are headed by single women. So many times we see that the father either had not returned or the father had been killed or had disappeared. And these women now are taking care of their family and not only of their children, sometimes of their parents as well, sometimes of their in-laws, sometimes of sick children. And they have some skills, but they need some support in order to start. So sometimes something as little as a sewing machine can make a big difference in someone's life because it's a chance, it's an opportunity to start making a living. Sometimes it's someone, when I was in Syria, and I've been to Syria several times since the change happened in December, people came back and we went and met different families that had lost its livelihood. They either had, it was a carpenter or a blacksmith whose workshops had been destroyed. And so a very small grant could be up to $100, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more, but it really helps them to buy new tools. And then they can start working, making a little bit of money. And that ability to make a living and slowly and gradually become less dependent on humanitarian assistance is really their ultimate wish. We see a lot of determination. Um, The challenges are extreme, but they are really hopeful and they want to build a future for themselves and for their children inside their villages, inside their towns. They want to contribute to the rebuilding of the country, but they need support. And that's why we always say the international community had helped throughout the years with trying to minimize the impact of displacement on these people. But now is not the time to leave them alone, even if it sounds and people get the impression that the conflict is over. But the humanitarian crisis is not over. It's ongoing, it continues. And if we don't help and continue to help people now, they will find themselves forced to flee again. At the same time, we have refugees who are still in neighboring countries, in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and they are watching what's happening inside Syria. And they're calling their family, they are calling their relatives, friends who had returned, and they ask them, what are the conditions? Can we come back? Most of the refugees we speak to in neighboring countries, 80% of them tell us they wish and they want to come back eventually to Syria. However, they are still hesitant and they're looking at different elements. They are looking at safety and security issues. They're looking at schools, infrastructure, livelihood opportunities. Is there a village? Is there a hospital functioning in their area of origin? Is there a school? Is there a university? So these people are watching, and if we want to end the displacement of these Syrians, we have to help inside the country. So those who are returning are also they could be a pull factor or a push factor for more Syrian refugees to come in. So in addition to all the humanitarian assistance we provide to vulnerable families who had returned, we also try to extend that assistance to families and areas that to the communities that are hosting those returnees, because everyone is in need in Syria. And integration of these newly arrived Syrians is very important to avoid any social tensions. We also try for families who can't afford transportation from neighboring refugee countries but want to return, we help them with transportation. So we provide the buses, they get on the buses with their luggage, they go to the borders with Syria, they cross with UNHCR buses that takes them to their destinations, to their final destinations. And there, through our community centers, UNHCR inside Syria also provides cash assistance in order to help them start. It's about $500 to $600 per family. We cannot afford to give it to every family, but it really makes a big difference for people to be able to start, to have a fresh start, and to support this hope that they have. It's such an emotional moment. And I was very lucky to have witnessed it so many times as people were leaving Lebanon and Jordan, and at the same time as people were arriving inside Syria in the past 9 months. The amount of anxiety and hope, and many times it's disbelief that this is finally happening. We saw many families who had been separated in the past 14 years and they haven't been able to see each other. So now, for the first time, they are meeting. We have seen children who were born outside Syria and now returning to Syria, meeting with their cousins for the first time. The excitement, it's mixed with sadness, with all the exhaustion that people had felt throughout the years. And now they are hoping that there will be relief. But they can't do it alone, and we have to stand by them. I'm sure you are aware a lot of funding from big governments like the US government, like some European governments, had been cut back. And that has a lot of consequences on our ability to reach as many people as we would like to reach because there's so many who are in need. And that's where your role as the private sector, private donors comes in, because you can really help us to minimize the impact of the severe underfunding situations that we are facing. The needs are still huge. It's still immense inside Syria. But at the same time, we have a golden opportunity. It's one of those rare moments historically where we see a conflict comes to an end and refugees and IDPs, internally displaced people, have a chance to go back in safety, without fearing for any persecution, without fearing that war will erupt again. But again, they are going back to a country that had suffered a lot in the past 14 years and need us to help them create the right conditions so that they can rebuild, they can recover, and stabilize Syria. Because the stability of Syria, it's not only something that's critical for Syrians, it's critical for the whole Middle East. Syria is strategically located, and anything that happens inside Syria affects and has an impact on neighboring countries. So I think our appeal is to help us help those people who wish to return, help us make the return dignified, help us make it viable, make it as easy as possible on them so that they can help themselves. Help us also support the refugees who are still in neighboring countries, who are still displaced. And many of them feel that it's still not the right time for them to go back. They don't feel safe enough to go back, or the conditions that are in their areas of origin are still not in place for them to feel that they can move again, take their family, and move back to Syria. I'm not sure if I exceeded my 10 minutes, and I apologize for my voice. I'm a bit sick, but I hope this made sense for people.
Thank you so much, Rula. No problem at all, and thank you for this perspective. I think it's really, clear from your explanation how UNHCR really steps hand in hand with refugees, and the number one thing that we want is for people to make their own decisions in a dignified way, in a way that's empowering for them, and enables them to, contribute to rebuilding Syria, which is so important. So thank you so much. So I think as you mentioned, for many families, this journey back to Syria is filled with obstacles and uncertainties. And one of the ways that we help them address this is providing transport and providing options to help make their journey home smoother. And this is where we're going to hear from Chris Murphy, who is supporting Syrians from Jordan return to the country. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, and good evening from our time. Thank you everyone so much for joining this session, and I'm really glad to be able to join you. And a big thanks to Liz and Rula. I think you set the stage extremely well. Liz, as you mentioned, my name is Chris Murphy. I work with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency's country office in Jordan. So my role, unlike Rula's, which serves the greater region, is really focusing on the refugee situation in Jordan specifically. Over the past year or so, my main focus has been on coordinating UNHCR's voluntary repatriation programs to support Syrian refugees to return for the first time. I think Liz and Rula, they set the stage well from a global and a regional perspective. But what I wanted to do was take you through our experience over the past year in kind of managing and establishing these programs. But maybe first, I'll start with a little bit of background on UNHCR in Jordan, just to set the scene. But Jordan has long been host to one of the largest refugee populations in the world. At the start of 2025, there were over 650,000 refugees and asylum seekers living in Jordan. About 90% of those come from Syria, more specifically. But we also have refugees from other countries around the world, including Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, Iraq. Most refugees in Jordan, about 80%, are living in host communities right alongside their Jordanian neighbors, while about 20% are living in refugee camps. And I'm thrilled that Noor is here and she'll be able to speak to her experience in Zatri. So first off, what is UNHCR's role when it comes to returns? And I think Rula and Liz, you had mentioned this, but most important to know is that we as UNHCR are not approving or rejecting refugees' decisions on return. This is always a voluntary decision and quite often very, very deeply personal for these refugees. And they're often weighing many, many different factors to decide whether or not to return home if the conditions allow. The way that I see our role, I think that we are here to accompany refugees in that decision-making process. What I mean by that is being there and making sure that we're providing accurate information, offering one-on-one counseling with refugees who may have questions about what the return process looks like or what they can expect when they return to their home countries, and providing support to facilitate that returns process. All of this together, we hope that we're supporting refugees in making informed choices about their futures. Now, even before the political shifts that we've seen in Syria in December 2024, as UNHCR Jordan, we had always maintained a level of preparedness on the returns portfolio. So for example, we maintained a presence at the Jordanian-Syrian border, where we were able to engage with authorities and support the small number of refugees that were trying to cross before the fall of Assad's government. We participated in a lot of community outreach, maintaining that two-way dialogue with refugees to understand their concerns, their questions, and their interest in return overall. We have different helplines that refugees can call to seek out individual counseling. But since the political changes in Syria, we've seen a drastic shift. Before 2025, we may have had a couple thousand refugees returning in any given year. Since 8th of December, which is a date that will be seared into my memory for forever, I think, we've now seen more than 157,000 Syrian refugees who have made the decision to return home from Jordan. And this development has significantly reshaped both the operational context here in Jordan, but as well as our programming. But I think most important, and Rula, you touched on this as well, is these figures aren't just numbers, but we have to think of them as families who are making very complex and deeply personal choices about their futures. So as I mentioned, this really all kicked off on 8th of December. After that, we started working together with humanitarian partners, with the government of Jordan, to understand what will come next. I think I'll be very honest, these political developments in Syria came as a surprise, both in the timing and the speed with which the government had changed. But for the first time in the Syrian displacement crisis, many refugees started to see a very real opportunity to go home. And I would say in those initial weeks, the reactions were of excitement and hope. We started to see numbers of people crossing into Syria at the border start to increase almost immediately. But as the weeks went on, as the months went on, I think we saw refugees shift into weighing the different practical realities of return. I wouldn't say their minds changed about return, but it was definitely more cautious optimism, if I can say that. In our counseling and in our outreach with refugees, I think questions that we heard again and again, was about the condition of their home. If I go home, what's there? Will I have a house? Where will I live? Questions about, can I find work? Are the medications that I receive in Jordan going to be available in Syria? And of course, lingering concerns about security. All of this happened so fast. It was such a dramatic change. Many refugees were questioning, what if the situation in Syria becomes worse again? What are my options then? But alongside that, we would continue to hear the excitement about return, with many refugees expressing so much hope in being able to reunite with their families, see their brothers, sisters, cousins, mothers for the first time in nearly 13 years. But in those discussions, we also heard about how different financial barriers in Jordan, especially related to debt in Jordan, as well as transportation costs, would stand in the way of them being able to return. Very early on, refugees started coming to us asking for very specific assistance with transportation. I think since the change in government in Syria, it opened up new business opportunities for people to engage in cross-border activities. And with that came some exploitation within the transportation sector in Jordan. Journeys by bus that would have cost maybe $200 or $300 for a family before December 2024. Refugees were now quoting that they were being charged upwards of $700 to $1,000, which was significantly more than most refugee household budgets would allow. So because of that, we worked with a partner called Jet Buses, which is one of the famous tourist bus companies here in Jordan, to establish a transportation assistance program for refugees that would give safe bus travel into Syria, as well as a small luggage allowance for refugees. But most important was, we weren't telling refugees to hop on these buses. Refugees had to proactively approach us and express their interest in this program. So refugees would call our helpline and say, hey, I am considering return and I need help. That also gave us the opportunity to have targeted counseling with each and every family that is receiving our transportation assistance. And that helped us to make sure that the decisions are in fact voluntary and well-informed. And it's also helped get us some interesting insights into how refugees are making these decisions. When we look at the data from those interviews, we see that almost 75% are citing improved security conditions inside Syria and a desire for family reunification as the main drivers for refugees to go back. But with that, about 25% of those refugees who had decided on return were still expressing concerns. A lot of these concerns were either financial or economic about the situation in Syria. They might be expressing concerns about security and what could happen in the future. But I think one point that I always take with me is that in this first wave, the family aspect was huge. 95% of the refugees going on our buses were telling us that they had close family or friends who would help them with their initial integration into Syria. So since we started this, which was on 20th of January, so just a little over a month after the fall of the government, about 10,000 refugees have accessed our transportation services. And I will say, and I think Rula, you highlighted this very well, I feel so privileged to be able to witness this moment. It is very, very historic. And even at 6:30 this morning, I was at one of the departure points here in Amman. And as Rula rightly pointed out, it is a very emotional moment. I think I first went into it thinking that this will be very, very happy, people will be excited, but it is this very human mix of emotions that people are feeling. At those bus stops, you'll see some families, saying goodbye to other relatives who might be staying in Jordan. You'll see children who, you look around at the kids and really anyone under the age of 15 probably has no personal memories of their time in Syria. So again, what always strikes me with those movements is the bravery of these families who are choosing to return home. It really is an incredible, incredible moment. And I feel so fortunate to be able to be part of that for a lot of families. So continuing, we've been doing this since January. As I said, about 10,000 refugees have benefited from this service. But we've also made more investments in our community outreach, making sure that we have connections with the communities that can inform our programming. How do we make sure that what we're offering actually meets refugees' needs? And of course, those shift with time. One thing that we heard a few months on was that while the buses have really helped, and refugees generally consider that transportation assistance as safe and reliable, they kept on telling us it's not covering all of our needs. Refugees would cite debts, including, say, with public hospitals in Jordan, the cost of shipping, all of their worldly possessions, right? While the buses can bring some luggage, things like beds and appliances that refugees have saved up here in Jordan to afford, we didn't have the capacity to ship. And refugees would also talk about, as Rula mentioned, the initial costs in Syria. If they know that their house needs to be repaired, do they have sufficient savings and funds to cover themselves in those first few months? So listening to this feedback, we have launched a cash assistance project where we're providing refugees with $100 per individual traveler who is returning to Syria. This is, very, very new. We've started this just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but so far 700 refugees have benefited from this. When we talk to those refugees, we do hear that they are using this money for a lot of these return expenses. Like I said, paying off debts, shipping of furniture, and also purchasing some essentials before their departure. One refugee one of my team was speaking with today was saying how the money went directly to allow her to purchase 3 months worth of medication, just so she can settle and make sure that she will be able to find somewhere to get that needed medicine once she arrives to Syria. But also, I think the shift gives refugees a lot more flexibility and dignity to plan their own returns. So we hope to continue this and continue to expand it. And we're very happy with the feedback that we've received so far. Now with these returns, there certainly
I'm sorry to cut you off, Chris.
Sure.
I'm just conscious of time and I really want to give Noor a chance to speak. So I'm not sure how much further you have, but yeah.
No worries. Just wrapping up, right?
Yep.
As Rula had mentioned as well, not all refugees will return. Rula had mentioned that 80% plan to go home one day, but that leaves about 20% here in Jordan that don't have that same intention. So here in Jordan, we will continue to have a large number of refugees who need protection and assistance. And we are facing one of the most severe funding shortfalls that we've ever experienced. By August, only about 1/3 of our needed funds have been received. So we are cutting different services, including protection services for children and survivors of violence. Healthcare in camp locations has been cut. Different forms of cash assistance to cover basic needs is also dwindling. But yeah, I'll wrap up there. But I do hope that this example shows how we work in partnership with communities, in partnership with other humanitarian actors to inform our programming. Refugees need our support both where they are here in Jordan, as well as for those who are choosing to return. And I think, what I hope for the future is that we really can honor their courage and ensure that the resources are available to help make their new beginnings, safe, dignified, and sustainable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, and sorry to have to cut you a little bit short. But I think, yeah, it's really clear that the funding that we receive from donors really helps us be flexible and shift our response as is needed, because events, as you mentioned, can change so quickly, and we need to be able to shift our approach quickly to support people as they need the most. So finally, we are very pleased to be hearing from Noor Akram Al-Hariri, who is a Syrian poet based in Zaatari camp in Jordan. Aisha Jitan from USA for UNHCR will be translating for her as Noor speaks Arabic. So please, over to you, Noor. So we're just hoping that Noor's connectivity is allowing her to join.
مرحبا يا نور.
أهلا يعطيك العافية.
الله يعافيكي. أهلا فيكي، وفينا نبلش وقت ما أنتي جاهزة.
سلام الله عليكم من قلوب أنهكتها الحروب. أنا نور ابنة السورية التي لم تزل تحمل جراحها.
Peace be upon you. I am Noor, a daughter of Syria, a country still carrying its wounds.
أطل عليكم باسم السلام المشترك والألم التي يعيشونه الملايين من الناس التي فارقوا بيوتهم.
I speak to you also in the name of many other countries who are still crying out, a land forced into exile, and in the name of every place where people's dreams have been broken.
بكل الشرق الأوسط، ومنهم أوجاع فاقت أوجاع العالم، فلسطين الحبيبة، السودان التي نزفت، اليمن وسوريا الحبيبة.
I speak also in the name of Palestine, of Sudan, of the entire Middle East, who are still crying out in dreaming of their homeland that is worthy of us all.
يا سادة، أنا لم أخرج من وطني، بل وطني هو الذي خرج من صدري.
I did not leave my homeland. It was my homeland that left my chest.
تبعثر في حقيبة صغيرة وفي صور معلقة على الجدار لم يعد لها جدار.
Scattered into a small suitcase and a photograph hanging on a wall that no longer stands.
من سوريا أحمل أشياء لا تنسى. أحمل بيتي وطفولتي الوردية. حملت كل شيء في حقيبتي وغادرت جسدا بلا روح.
From Syria, I carry things that cannot be forgotten, the innocence of my childhood and my neighbor's laughter as she knocked on my door.
حين وصلت إلى الأردن حملت حقيبة خفيفة، لكن ثقل العالم كان على كتفي.
When I arrived in Jordan, I carried a light bag, but the weight of the world was on my shoulders.
الخيمة الأولى بدأت صامتة كأنها موت مؤجل، وكأنني كلما التفت حولي وجدت وجوها تشبه وجهي.
The first tent in the camp felt cold and silent until I looked around and I found faces that looked like my own.
أطفالا يركضون حفة على التراب، ونساء بلا أمل يحاولون أن يصنعوا الحياة رغم العدم، ورجالا شابت وجوههم من قسوة الحياة.
Children were running barefoot on the dirt. Women were trying to make a kitchen and a life out of canvas. And elderly men sitting at the tent doors, their eyes fixed on what lay beyond the border.
في المخيم تعلمت أن المدارس ليست مجرد جدار. رأيت الأطفال يكتبون على دفاتر تمزقها الريح.
In the camp, I learned that a school is not just walls. I saw children writing in notebooks torn apart by the wind.
كأنهم يكتبون بإصرار، كأن التعليم آخر نافذة للأمل. رأيت كبار السن يروون حكايات الوطن كي لا ينساها كل من عاش في هذا الظلام.
Yet they wrote with determination, as if education were the last window of hope. I saw the elderly telling stories of home every evening so that the homeland would remain alive in the memory of a new generation.
أي مأساة تلك التي عاشتها اللاجئون في كل أنحاء العالم، ولم يدرك أحد بما جرى بنا.
ممكن تعيديها آسفة.
أي مأساة تلك التي عاشوها اللاجئون في كل أنحاء العالم ولم يشعر بنا أحد.
The refugees of the whole world have lived this fate, and even in foreign soil, to let it blossom anew.
وبعد سنين من الصراع المدمر تغير كل شيء. لم يعد البيت بيتا ولا الطريق طريقا.
And after many years and destruction, many things have changed. There is destruction and houses are no longer houses.
الدمار كان كبيرا، لكن كان قلبي أوسع مما مررنا به من أسوة الحياة.
The destruction was huge, but what was in my heart was bigger. And it was my dignity that I want to write for those who had no one to write for them.
الوطن لا يعيش فقط في الخريطة، بل في قدرتنا أن نحمله في قلوبنا ونزرعه كل يوم.
Homeland does not live just in the home. It lives in our hearts and what we will grow every single day.
أنا اليوم كاتبة لوجعي أولا. رثيت حلمي في القانون، ومن بعد رثائي لكنني لم أزل حية على قيد الحياة.
Today, I am a writer, and I dream of continuing my studies in law so that I can become a voice for those who are silenced, a defender of human dignity when it is stripped away.
ما زلت أحارب كي أصل إلى ما أريد، لكن هذا الظلام أنار على قلبي ثم أطفأني ثم مت وما زلت أحيا.
I want to write for those who had no one to write for them, and to keep the strength that keeps us alive.
كنت أحلم أن أكون صوت الحق وأدافع عن الإنسانية وعن المستضعفين وعن كل طفل عاش على هذه الحياة.
I dream to write for justice, to dream for the children who had no voices, and to continue to advocate for justice in this life.
كنت فراشة أحلق في السماء حتى جاء أحدهم وقصص أجنحتي، ومت على هذه الأرض وبقيت أنثى بائسة سوداوية.
It reminds us that hope is not a luxury, but a condition for survival, a necessity of life. And the earth still breathes, and so do we.
من الركام ينبت العشب الصغير، عشب الذكريات، الأمل، الحياة.
I have hopes for life. I have hope for hope, and I have hope for life going forward.
أنا هنا لا أحكي قصة لجوئي فقط، بل أخبركم عن ملايين الناس التي فقدوا الرغبة، فقدوا الأمل، فقدوا الحياة، فقدوا كل شيء.
I am here not only to tell a story of exile, of displacement. I am here to say that a homeland is born every time we help another, and for all that we have lost, that things are more precious than destruction in all that we have lost.
أخبركم وجع الفتيات التي كانوا يحاولون كل يوم في كل صباح أن يفعلوا شيئا من أجل أن يكون هناك أمل ينتظرهم، أو حلما يتحقق على أمل أن يتحقق.
I am here to tell you about dreams that we had, that we knew that would come true, for hopes and dreams that will come true.
أخبركم عن الحرمان التي بات ينير عيناي أمي ودمعة أبي وحسرتي أن أصبح ذات يوما فتاة القضاء.
I am here to tell you about the tears of my mother, of my father, of the sacrifices, and our ability to rise again in hope.
أود أن نفتح قلوبنا كي نثبت أن الإنسان أهم من هذا الخراب الذي حصل والذي سوف يحصل في المستقبل.
And we will open our hearts in kindness and compassion every time we choose to believe that human life is more precious than destruction.
يا سادة، أعيدوا لنا الأحلام والوطن ليس كما كنا نحلم بل كما كنا نتمنى، وطن يليق بنا بدموعنا ويليق بقدرتنا على أن نصبح لاجئين قادرين على تحقيق ما نريد.
So our homeland not as it once was, but as we dream it can be, a homeland worthy of tears, of our sacrifices.
ساءت بنا الأحوال كثيرا وما زلنا نعاني ونحلم أن نصبح ذات يوم ما نريد وما نتمنى أن نريد.
We will experience a day where we have what we have dreamed of and all that we have hoped and dreamed of that we wanted.
الشمس التي أضاءت أطفأت بقلبي الكثير، لكنها لم تزل متعبة بسبب الأحلام التي ماتت، بسبب كل الأحوال التي حصل عليها اللاجئون السوريون.
There are dreams that have died from the Syrian refugees and the people who have fled, for the people who have had dreams that were lost.
أتمنى أن يعم السلام في كل بلاد العالم، في سوريا الحبيبة وفلسطين الجريحة واليمن والسودان. وشكرا لكم.
I hope that we can have happier days in all of our lands, in Syria, in my heart, in Palestine that is aching, in Yemen, and in Sudan. And thank you so much.
Shukran. Thank you so much for those beautiful words, and you know, it's very moving. So shukran, and thank you, Aisha, for translating for us. You know, I think listening to these words, I was reflecting that, you know, these are really difficult times, not just for refugees, but for a lot of us. There are so many things happening outside in the world, and these forces seem beyond our control. However, you know, something that we talk about a lot in UNHCR is that refugees don't give up hope, so we cannot give up hope. That is the most important thing that we have, and it's the most important thing that we should maintain for people. So thank you so much. We did run a bit over, so we have less time for questions than anticipated, but I think it was well worth it to listen, you know, to listen to these testimonies and these stories. So thank you again. The chat box is open if you would like to submit any questions, as well as a Q&A section on the bottom of your screen if you would like to submit a question anonymously. But I'll be keeping an eye on the chat there if anybody would like to speak up. While we're waiting to see if any questions are coming in, I just want to flag a couple of things that we would like to you know, we'd like to highlight. So first of all, to say thank you again to everybody who's on the call and who is a donor to UNHCR. Your support really does make a big difference. You've heard Rula and Chris both talk about the fact that this is a time when we've experienced the biggest drop in humanitarian funding from governments in our entire history. So it's really important to have this support from you guys in the private sector to sustain critical programs and to provide hope. October 9th is Donor Advised Funds Day. So that's a moment of to celebrate the power of giving through donor advised funds. So if you do manage one of these funds on behalf of your client, please invite them to make a donation to UNHCR and Stand with Refugees. There is an upcoming event as well, another event which should be very exciting for USA for UNHCR donors, which is a virtual mission moment to hear firsthand stories from Ukraine and Sudan. And so these are, you know, insights that you wouldn't usually get from war-torn places. And that's your chance to sort of get a peek behind the curtain of how these things work. So it's quite quite exciting. And finally, we really encourage you to be a voice for refugees. Please do advocate. I think we're living in times where, you know, issues like refugees, migration are becoming very divided and very, you know, very polarizing. And I think we need vocal supporters of refugees, people who stand for these principles, and people who speak about how they're proud to help and proud to support. So those would be my my key messages for you all. I can't see any questions in the chat. I think that might be everything. So I just want to say thank you once again to our speakers, Shukran, to Noor. And yes, thank you, Rula, thank you, Chris. And I wish you all a very good, Wednesday, the rest of your day on Wednesday. And you've got the contacts for Devi and Aisha here. If you have any more questions, and they'll be more than happy to support. Thank you again and have an excellent afternoon.